The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
All right, well, it's my pleasure to introduce our next expert. Dr. Carreker's response to my initial invitation to join us today was swift and succinct. Her reply was, "You said the magic word, spelling. Count me in." So, thrilled to have her. Dr. Suzanne Carreker joins us from Concord, Massachusetts, where she's Principal Educational Content Lead in Lexia Learning Systems. Dr. Carreker previously served as Senior Vice President of Innovative Solutions at Niehaus Education Center in Texas. She's the author of systematic literacy curricula and journal articles. Dr. Carreker is a certified academic language therapist and qualified instructor. She's also authored textbook chapters on reading and spelling, including one that is one of my primary guidebooks, Multisensory Teaching of Basic Language Skills. She currently serves on the board of the IDA, the International Dyslexia Association, and she's coordinated the development of a certification exam for teachers of reading. Please help me welcome Dr. Carreker.
I am delighted to be here, and I am delighted to be talking about spelling. It is one of my most favorite subjects. I think it's a subject that is not really understood in terms of how valuable it is for students in terms of not just their writing, but also their reading and their sense of confidence. What I'd like you to do is to turn to your neighbor, and I'd like you to talk about what makes a good speller. What makes a good speller? So I'm sure that the very first thing you said was that a good speller has a good orthographic memory. Isn't that what you said? So let's talk about this idea of orthographic memory. Orthographic memory is not visual memory. It's not a good visual memory. It's not a photographic memory. It is an orthographic memory. It is a memory for the correct writings of words. We know that good spellers just know those patterns. They hold them in memory, and they can spell words very accurately, very easily. The other thing that we know good spellers have is that deep knowledge of the phonological, orthographic, and morphologic patterns of the language. They know those patterns, they hold them in memory so they can remember how words are spelled. So for students that don't have that good orthographic memory, we really can help create that good orthographic memory by teaching them the very things that Marcia Henry was talking about this morning. They need to understand the phonological patterns, those orthographic patterns, and the morphological patterns as well. There are many different kinds of spellers. I'm sure you're aware of the Friday speller. This is Hillary's mom talking to Hillary's dad. Hillary's mom says, "Hillary's spelling test is today, Ted. Can you give her one last run through?" Dad says, "Sure." Dad sits down with Hillary. "Ready? Erosion." And Hillary says, "That's not the first word, Dad. How can I spell them if you jumble them up?" And Dad says, "You only know them in order?" And Hillary says, "I don't know them, I memorized them. Nobody said anything about having to know them." And when students understand the patterns of the language, then they know how to spell words. They're not just memorizing them. So do you know some Friday spellers? Yeah. They know the words for the test, and then they're gone. Then you probably know the safe speller. This is our safe speller sitting down to write a letter. "Dear Tanya, how are you today? Today I went for a walk with my grandfather, old pal." So you know the safe spellers, they look like perfect spellers, right? Because they only use the words they know how to spell. And oftentimes, these are the students that have this incredible oral language. I mean, the words they use when they're speaking are big and fancy and sophisticated. But when they write, it's very simplistic writing because they don't know how to spell them, so they just use a word they know how to spell. But when students understand the patterns of the language, then they're more willing to take a chance, to be risk takers, and try to spell words that are part of their oral language, even though they don't know exactly how to spell them. And perhaps you know this one, the bizarre speller. So here's our bizarre speller having a heart-to-heart with the coach. The coach says, "Why don't you get this play straight? Do I have to spell it out?" And our little bizarre speller says, "Come on, coach, the situation's bad enough without dragging spelling into it." So you know the bizarre spellers. You, by the end of the year, have finally figured out the way they think about words, but anyone else can't because they just don't know how to put the sounds and letters together. They don't have those patterns in mind, and they're the ones that we worry about the most because we know if they're struggling with spelling to this degree, they're probably struggling with their decoding as well. So if we work on those patterns, we're going to help spelling and we're going to help decoding as well. That as we think about spelling and decoding, they do seem to be two sides of a coin. So if we think about decoding, that's going from the letter to the sound, and when we think about spelling, it's going from the sound to the letter. So it really does sound like two sides of the coin, right? They're like opposites, inverse operations. But as Linnea Airy says, they're two sides of a coin, almost. And here is an interesting truism in English. If you can spell a word, guess what you can do? You can read it. Because if you can spell a word, what does that mean? You hold that word in memory, you know the sounds, the letters, how they go together. That means that you'll be able to read it. But the reverse is not true. Just because you can read a word doesn't mean you can spell it. So this is the word what? Okay, now I'd like you, and I'm going to see if this works. I'd like you to now turn to your neighbor and spell the word. Yeah. So you see how that works? When I showed you that word, you read it instantly. And accurately, I will say. But when you turned to your neighbor, what did you say? How about this one? This is the word. Okay, now would you like to turn to your neighbor and spell that one? So how did that work for you? Little bit harder to spell it. And what's interesting about this word is it's almost a word you can sound out, right? But what really bothers me is that O at the end. What the heck is that doing there? I look at that and I say, that word is Greek to me. You know that expression, when you say something is Greek to me, it means I just don't understand it. Well, what Marcia Henry taught me is that you have to be excited about words. You have to understand why they're spelled the way they are. So I went into the dictionary to try and investigate why that O was there in this word. So as you look at the letters that surround the O, you have a P-O-E. Does that remind you of some other words that you know? P-O-E, poem, poet. Well, it turns out that this word comes from the exact same root or combining form that poem comes through, or poet, and it means maker. And I also meant to tell you that it's not just Greek to me, it actually is Greek. It is a Greek word. So that's why it looked Greek to me, because it's Greek. But P-O-E comes from the combining form that means maker. And the first part of that word means name. So onomatopoeia is the thing I name. So the name or the thing that makes that sound. So a bird makes the chirp. The bee makes the buzz. So if we look at the origin, we really sort of understand what that means. There's the name that something makes. And we can also understand why that O is there. It's part of the combining form that gave the meaning of that word. So today we're really going to concentrate on looking at student errors and helping us understand what it is they know and what it is they need to know. When we look at spelling errors, we really have a window into the students' minds. Their spellings will tell us exactly what they know and what they need to know. And we're going to use a rubric, and that was handed out to you. And this rubric was put together. As you know, rubrics are never perfect. Not every spelling error is going to fit a rubric. But this is after we looked at about 200 spelling tests with 20 words per spelling test. And we were looking for patterns of errors. And this is what we found really helped us figure out where students were having difficulties and where they might need instruction. So we found, and we were concentrating mostly at K1 and 2, and we found that if we were looking at spelling errors, many of them were just random strings of letters, particularly in kindergarten, and we gave that a 0 because that means they really don't have the essence of spelling, which really is translating sounds into symbols, so that was a 0. Then we found that there were students that actually had a letter for every sound, so they were detecting the sounds, and they were putting a letter there to represent that sound, but 2 or more of those letters were really not reasonable spellings, that they really were probably having difficulty distinguishing between sounds or discriminating sounds. So that said to us, it's not so much phonemic awareness as we might think in that 0, but it's really how to refine those sounds so they're hearing those sounds well. And then we found there were students that marked all the letters, but really there was just one sound. So we really could have very focused instruction on that one sound. Then the category that was really big was the category we named 3, and that's the idea that they're marking all the sounds and everything is very reasonable. In other words, these are very phonetic spellings. Anyone, even people who aren't teachers. I mean, we as teachers can read a whole lot, right? You read Alan's paper this morning very well because you know those kids. You've seen that spelling before. But a 3, anyone could read because it's very phonetic. And this often means that they don't know the patterns of the language, or they don't know those patterns or rules that tell them when to double drop or change a letter. So there is instruction that we need to give them specifically on those patterns, so they can build those patterns in memory so that they can spell words quickly and accurately. And then number 4 was kind of interesting because we found that as students were getting instruction in patterns, they often overgeneralized those patterns, like sticking the silent E at the end of every word, just for good measure. They'd learned it, let's just put it on every word. So we found that there were some students that really did understand that there was a pattern that helped them spell, but they weren't always sure when to use it. And then, of course, 5 was a correct spelling. So what we're going to do is to use this rubric, and we're going to look at some of the spelling errors that we looked at and decide whether they're 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I didn't give you any 5s because that would be too easy because they're spelled correctly. Now, again, nothing's perfect, and sometimes you have to make a decision. What instruction would really help if this were an error that the student is making a lot of times? So we really are thinking about the preponderance of errors. Not that they just do it once, but they do it several times, because that really gives us an idea of where we need to focus instruction. So here are some spelling errors, and you have your rubric in front of you. So look at the spelling of chunk, and what would you say about that spelling? Think about the word, think about the sounds, think about how the student is representing those sounds. What would you say? And I would agree with you, because what is the student doing? Yeah, matching every sound to a pattern that's very reasonable, right? It's very reasonable to spell that nasal N with NG. So what we need to do is just help that student know when that sound's going to be spelled with NG at the end of a word, and when it's N before any letter that makes the k sound. How about cried? Yeah, so do you know exactly what you need to teach this student? Yeah, when do I use C versus K? And how do I know when to change the Y to I? So, I have my instruction mapped out for me because the student is giving me that information through his or her errors. How about number 3? What do you think? I would say 0. Are all the sounds being represented? What don't we have? The vowel sound is missing. So this student probably needs some work listening for the number of sounds in words, maybe doing some work with moving tiles for every sound they hear, because they're not showing us that they can detect each sound in the word. How about brick? 3. What are you going to teach? Right, when do I use CK versus K? How about number 5, simple? What do you think? I think I said a 1, and why? Yeah, is every sound being represented? Yeah. And do you like the way everything is being spelled? Well, it looks like they are mixing up the eh and the I. Does that ever happen to people here in Tennessee? I'm actually from Texas, and you write with a pen and you wear a pen. There's no difference in the sounds. So that would be a 1. How about 6? Clipped. So are they detecting all the sounds, spelling them all in a reasonable way, but yeah, there's a pattern they don't know. They don't know when to double that final consonant, but certainly everything else is intact. How about number 7, umpire? Think about, are they detecting all the sounds, and are they matching those sounds to reasonable spellings? I would say 2, because everything's reasonable except what? The and the n. Now, are those sounds that are easily confused? So again, we have our instruction marked out for us for this student. How about number 8? 0. Now, I'm going to come to this little kindergartner's defense. This was beginning of kindergarten. The student's teacher every day wore a locket, and on the locket were her initials, and her initials were SMC. Oh! So the student wasn't that far off. Hadn't really understood how letters and sounds go together, but by the end of the year, the student was on target. But it was a 0 for the beginning of the year. How about patch? So are they detecting all the sounds, and are they matching all the sounds in a reasonable way, but yet it's still not correct? Why not? Right, because they don't know when to use TCH versus CH. So if there's a pattern I can teach them, that's a 3. They just need to know when I use TCH versus CH. How about jug? Okay, are they representing all the sounds? And are all the sounds reasonable representations? Yeah, there's one we don't like, so that would be 2. So the student is confusing k and g, and we'll talk about those in a little bit, but we know that's where we need to focus instruction. How about 11, drill? It's a 3. Every sound is represented. Every sound is being represented in a reasonable way. The student just doesn't know to do what? Double the L. You don't hear it, so they have to know the pattern. And then 12, how about jumped? And I would say 3. Again, everything is spelled the way we expect, but the student doesn't really understand the idea of morphology, that t sound at the end isn't really part of the word all the time. It's part of the word when it's showing us something has already happened. So you did a great job looking at errors. I think you need just a little more practice. So with your partner, start working through these, and then we'll check them in a few minutes. But how would you look at all of these different spellings and rate them according to the rubric? 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4? All right, let's see how you did. And again, we may have some discussion about some of these because, again, students don't know the rubric, so they don't know which one they're working toward. So we'll see how we analyze these just to get an idea of what students know and what they need to know. How about sock? What did you say about sock? Right, again, just needs to know when to use the CK. How about rag? Right, the only sound that's not really reasonable is that final sound, but definitely detecting 3 different sounds. How about pebble? Let's see, what I said was 2. So what we are worried about maybe is the discrimination of the p and the b. So those are very similar. And we know he didn't double the b. He doesn't know to have that extra B. We can take care of that a little bit later, right? But I think what we really want to look at is whether or not the student can discriminate those 2 very similar sounds. How about went? Yeah, why a 0? All right, didn't represent every single sound. So this might be a student that needs a little more work on detecting the number of sounds in words. How about with? Let's see, I said 2, because again, we have the right number of sounds, but that last sound, there's some difficulty discriminating that. How about dream? Let's see, I think I actually said 2. What were you worried about? Yeah, the beginning, and because these were young children, oftentimes we see this over and over again. Children will spell that consonant R either with a J or with a CH, so it's not an uncommon pattern. If this were a student that were in the 5th or 6th grade, we might be a little bit more worried, but when they're young children, that's something that we do see students doing. But if you were to call it a 1, that's fine as well. It just, you know where you need to focus the instruction, that beginning, breaking the d, apart. How about ribbon? Right, everything is spelled just the way it sounds, and that unaccented vowel, that schwa, is hard to spell because it could be any of the vowels. How about strip? See what I said. Yeah, why did you say strip? Why did you say 1? I'm sorry, you said 0, exactly. Why? Yeah, it just seemed like they were strings of letters, sort of has it, but I think I would want to do a little more work with them at the phonological awareness level. How about mopping? Right, just knowing when to double that P. How about worked? Why? Yeah, out of order, but not a bad spelling, but an extra sound. So again, I would want to do a little more work at the phonological level to help this student. And how about music? Yeah, I think I said two. All the sounds are there, but it's that confusion that we know students have difficulty with. So looking at errors can really give us a sense of what it is we want to do to instruct students. Now, as I said, when we're looking at errors, we want to look at the preponderance of errors. Are they getting mostly zeros, mostly ones, mostly twos? Because they really will focus our instruction. So if a student is getting mostly zeros, we really need to be at that phonological awareness level where they are really working on segmenting words into sounds. Maybe they're starting to do some letters on tiles. They're matching sounds to letters, but they need to be at that very lowest level of detecting the sounds and segmenting words into sounds. If they get a lot of ones and twos, it really just tells us that we need to focus on the discrimination of one or two and maybe a few more sounds. The I and the are often very difficult for many, many students. The and the n. So what sounds are they having difficulty discriminating? Then 3, we need to teach a pattern. We need to teach those reliable rules of the language. And to me, patterns are when you're taking a sound and you're spelling it either with TCH or CH or K or CK, and there are going to be exceptions. We know with patterns there will be exceptions. When I think of rules, I'm thinking about when students know to double, drop, or change a letter, really when they're adding those suffixes. And by and large, when they're using rule words, in the act of adding that suffix, there aren't many exceptions. So that's how I like to differentiate a pattern and a rule. Patterns are just how you spell a particular sound in a word, and then rules are what happens when you add something to a base word. And then 4 is just that overgeneralization. And really the best thing to do when students keep adding E to everything, or everything is TCH, is just to have them to say the pattern or the rule. What is it that they overgeneralize? Have them talk about it. Have them say in their own words when you do it and when you don't need to do it. So let's look at what we might do with students who have scores of zeros. What does that instruction look like? So we might take blocks and have them listen to a word. I think this has 3 sounds. Let's try pat. Oh, it just had one sound. T. I hope there's not enough. Oh, that would be passed. So they would move a block for each sound in the word. P, s, t. And they need lots of work with that if they're not detecting all the sounds in a word. And then we can move to letter tiles. The word is list. L, I, s. So students with lots of zeros need to be at this level until they really can detect every sound in a word, and then they can begin to match up letters and sounds. What will we do if a student has a lot of ones or a lot of twos? Well, we need to figure out which sounds they're missing and what is going to be the best way to help them clarify the difference between those sounds. So some sounds are going to sound very similar, but they're going to look very different. So for some sounds, it's very helpful to have a mirror so students can see the difference in the sounds that sound very similar. So sounds that are very similar are and n. Now think about what happens when you say Describe it to me. Your lips are together. When you say what happens? Your mouth is open. Where's your tongue? It's lifted behind your teeth. Do they feel the same? No, not at all. Do they sound the same? Yes. So what we have to do is help students think about how they feel. So it could be they do need a mirror when they're spelling words. They need to be looking in their mirror and seeing how their mouth looks when they say those sounds. Other sounds, and do those sound alike? So tell me what happens when you say yeah, your teeth are resting on your bottom lip. When you say what happens? You're sticking your tongue out between your two teeth. So if they can see the difference, it will help them hear the difference. And how about I and eh? Yeah, what happens when you say I? It's like a smile, and eh. So here's a little rhyme you can give students. I makes you grin. Say that for me. I makes you grin. Eh drops your chin. So try that. I makes you grin. Eh drops your chin. So again, if they can feel and look at the sounds in a mirror, it can help them discriminate them. Then we know in English there are several letters or sounds that we can call cognates where they're very similar in the way they sound, but the only difference is one sound will activate the vocal cords and one sound will not. So we have the sound B. Put your fingers on your vocal cords. B, B. Is that voiced or unvoiced? B. It's voiced. Now I want you to keep saying that sound and then discontinue the vibration. So what happens when you go B, 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 B? What does it become? P, P, P. It becomes the sound that we associate with P. How about D, 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 D? And if you discontinue the vibration, it sounds like T. How about G, 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 G? So we can begin to understand why students make errors, because it doesn't seem reasonable that they'd mix these up until we think about how they're produced. They're very, very similar. It's just the activation of the vocal cords. How about J, 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 J? So, I gave you the answer. So that's sort of a surprise that students would confuse J and CH in spelling, right? Until we think about how similar those sounds are, and the only difference is the vibration of the vocal cords. How about Z, Z sound? And we see that a lot of students mixing those up. How about So exact same letter combination, one is voiced and one's not. How about v? That would be F, the sound that F makes. And how about j? This would be like in pleasure. J. So if students have difficulty discriminating sounds, think about the sound. Is it a sound that feels different when you feel it in your mouth or when you look in the mirror? Or is it different because of the activation or the not activating the vocal cords? And that can help students make that difference in their spelling. They can discriminate those sounds. So what do we do when students have difficulty with the patterns of the language, when they get a lot of threes? Well, we need to teach the patterns. And this is really sort of a big category, because this is where we would teach them how to spell a sound when it's in different positions in a word, or how to spell a sound when it's at the end of a word and we're adding a suffix. So there's a lot of different patterns and rules that we would teach if students are having difficulty with three. We have to help students understand that there are sounds in English that can be spelled many different ways. And sometimes there isn't a way to know when to use a sound. We have to use what's called best bet. And the best bet is, yes, there are lots of ways to spell this, but your best bet is this. Sometimes we can say it's based on the position. If it's in initial position, it's this word. If it's at final position, it's this way. And if it's anywhere in between, in medial position, it might be another way. But best bet is, there are lots of ways to spell it, but what's your best bet? So what I'd like you to do for 1 minute is to turn to your neighbor and think of all the different ways we can spell the sh sound. Okay, and stop. Raise your hand if you were able to find 14 different spellings of the sh sound. I am sure that you found this one, right? Now, what we're going to say about the sh sound, your best bet is SH. And then we can talk about when you might know to use something else, but when you have no idea, SH is probably your best bet. But we know sh can also be spelled CH, and that comes from where? French. It can also be spelled TI as in nation, SI as in percussion, CI as in special, SCI as in conscious, anxious. And tell me about all those words. They come from, they're all Latin, right? They're all from Latin. How about Schnauzer? German. How about ocean? And this doesn't really seem to have a home. A lot of words from different languages will spell that sh sound with CE. Same with SE. I think this is the only word in the English language, shaw, but there it is. I think this is the only word in the English language, but there it is, fuchsia. Tissue and issue, those are words that were Latin. They went into the French, and the French gave them that fancy little way of pronouncing them, and then they came into English. And then just S, as in sugar and sure. Often before the long U sound, S will have that sh sound. But you can see when you look at all 14 spellings that SH is probably your best spelling, unless, of course, we're talking about words of Latin origin, and then one of those other combinations might work well. And that's where we need to think about things that Marcia talked about this morning. We have to think about the syntax. We have to think about the meaning. All of those will support our choice of spelling. So here is a sound, and what dictates whether we use OI or OY is position. So what would we tell students about using OI versus OY? Right. OI in initial and medial position, and OY at the end of a word or a syllable. So think about the word oyster. OY, it's at the end of a syllable, oyster, or royal, but that is a pattern that's based on the position of the sound. How about the spelling of k? What seems to be the pattern? Is it based on position? Yeah, because we're talking about initial or medial k. And what else do we have to know? Right, what it comes before. So k before A, O, U, or any consonant is going to be spelled C. Before E, I, and Y, we're going to use K. Now, why don't we use C everywhere? Why can't we use C before E, I, and Y? Right, because then it becomes soft and says, well, why don't we just use K everywhere? Well, it just so happens in English, it's not a very popular letter. We just don't use it a lot. There are only specific times when we use it, and this is one. So when we teach these patterns, students can be looking at them as they read, they can be thinking about them as they spell. They're building those patterns in memory so they can spell the words again, and they can spell words that have the same patterns. Now, I promise you that when you teach a pattern, this is what's going to happen. In the back of the room. But what about ski? What about, oh, ski would work, wouldn't it? What about kangaroo? What about skate? What about skunk? And what are you going to say? You are. You're absolutely going to say that. You're going to say, good for you. That is so exciting when they say, but what about? What does that mean? No, before they're even thinking. Do you know what it means? They listened to you. They actually were paying attention, and they're thinking about the language. So that's exciting. And we can give them mnemonics like keep the kite in the sky. That's when we'll use K. Every other time we'll use C. And when they find those exceptions, we'll say, good for you. And these are words that come from other languages. So oftentimes when words are borrowed right from other languages, the spellings are going to be different. So what will we do when students don't double that consonant before adding a suffix, or they don't drop the E? Well, we need to teach those rules. And again, for me, a rule is when you're adding that suffix, and there are relatively few exceptions. Patterns are just where we spell sounds in different positions in words, and there may be exceptions, but we always want to go with your best bet. So tell me about these letters. Well, let me help you. I'll help you. First of all, tell me about H and K. Visually, tell me how they're similar. They're tall. So I'd like you to take one arm, and I'd like you to say H, K. Say that for me. H, K. And why did you do that? Because they're tall letters. Now tell me about Y, J. How are they similar? They go down. So take your other arm and go Y, J. Now tell me about V, W, X. They sit right on the line, right? V, W, X. So let's put it together. We have H, K, Y, J, V, W, X. Now, what's so special about H, K, Y, J, V, W, X? They never or rarely double in real English words. Okay, let's put it together. H, K, Y, J, V, W, X. Never or rarely double in real English words. These are the 7 brave letters of English. Turn to your neighbor and tell your neighbor what the 7 brave letters are. And when a student says, but what about the word divvy or savvy, you're going to say, I mean, and that, wow, if they think about those 2 words, that's really good for you. That's really fabulous. They will find the exceptions, and that's great, because it does mean they've listened to you and they're thinking about language. Now, let's look at when we might have to double a final consonant before adding a suffix. We're looking for a couple of things. We're looking to see that the base word ends in 1 vowel, 1 consonant, and 1 accent. And we're going to say that all 1-syllable words are accented. So we're looking for a base word that ends in 1 vowel, 1 consonant, 1 accent, and we're adding a vowel suffix. That means that the suffix begins with a vowel. So as we look at shop, does the base word end in 1 vowel, 1 consonant, and 1 accent? Yes. Yes, we have all 3 checkpoints. And how do you know it's accented? 1-syllable word, all 1-syllable words are accented. Are we adding a vowel suffix? Yes. So, will we have to double the final consonant? Yes. We have all 4 checkpoints, so we're going to double that final consonant. And notice that there's a four-leaf clover. And what does a four-leaf clover have? 4 leaves. And if you find a four-leaf clover with 4 leaves, what are you? Lucky. If you find one with 3 leaves, not so lucky. So let's see what happens. Tell me about the base word. Does it end in one vowel? Yes. One consonant? Yes. One accent? Yes. How do you know? One syllable. Are we adding a vowel suffix? No. Oh, it doesn't. So we're not lucky. We just added on. No four-leaf clover, but we know we don't have to double there. How about hot plus ER? The base word ends in one vowel, one consonant, one accent. Oh, I gave you the answers. And we're lucky, and we get to double. How about fax plus ing? Does the base word end in one vowel? Yes. One consonant? Yes. One accent? Yes. One vowel suffix? Yes. So we're lucky, we get to double. But I have 4 checkpoints. I have 4 checkpoints. Yeah. And in the back of the room, you'll see. Yeah. So this is why it's important to know about the 7 brave letters. We won't double them here. We'll just spell it this way. Now, the reason it's important to know about that one accent, when you're writing and you have to write the word begin and you want to make it beginning, what do you have to think about? Is that one N or 2 N's? So what are you going to think about? Where the accent falls, right? Begin. I'm going to have to double that final N, right? But if the accent falls on the first syllable, I won't double it. So that's why we emphasize that idea of the accented syllable. Even though they're just one-syllable words and all one-syllable words are accented, it's going to make a difference when you're spelling multisyllabic words. So when do we have to drop? This one's really easy, just 2 checkpoints. We're looking for a base word that ends in E, and we're looking for a suffix that begins with a vowel. So does our base word end in E? Yep. Does the suffix begin with a vowel? So we are going to drop the E and add the suffix. And I have to be honest with you, in all my years of working with dyslexic students, this is the rule I never have any difficulty with, because they don't know to put the E there in the beginning. But just in case, you can teach it. How about smoke? Does it end in final E? Yes. Does your suffix begin with a vowel? Yes. So we're going to drop the E before we add the suffix. How about shape? Final E, vowel suffix, oh, no, so we'll just add it on. So that's the dropping rule. The first one was the doubling rule, this is the dropping rule, and now we have to think about when we might have to change a letter when we're adding a suffix. So here we're looking for a word, a base word that ends in a consonant right before a final E, so it's a consonant, final E, and we're looking for a suffix that does not begin with I. Okay, so let's look at fly. Do we have a consonant and then a final Y? Yeah, there's a consonant right before the final Y. Do we have a suffix that does not begin with I? No. So we're not going to change the Y to I. What would happen if we changed the Y to I? We would have 2 I's. And here's what you say. 2 I's, very unwise. So tell me about 2 I's. And then, of course, yeah. How about skiing, everybody? What are you going to say? Good for you. She was listening. She's thinking about language. That's so exciting. How about reply? Does it end in a consonant and then a final Y? Yes. And if we're adding a suffix that does not begin with I? It does not. Are we adding a suffix that does not begin with I? Yeah, that's kind of a complicated one, isn't it? And so what are we going to do? Change the Y to I. There. How about baby? Do we have a consonant and then a final Y? And do we have a suffix that does not begin with I? Yes. So we have all of our checkpoints. That means we are going to change the Y to I. How about boy? Does it end in a consonant and a final Y? No. We don't have all the checkpoints, so we'll just add that suffix on. So we can teach students the rules for doubling, dropping, and changing. Then we can talk a little bit about the layers of English. I had to run up to the booth and change my number of words in English. It's grown since I last heard Marcia. And she showed you all of these different layers and how many words come from these different languages. And I've always loved this visual from Marcia. And the first time I heard her speak was in 1990 in Washington at the IDA conference. And she put this on the screen, and I was there. It was one of my first conferences. I was really excited. I thought this was so cool. But I had this really bad case of laryngitis. I couldn't talk. So I turned to my friend and I said, would you mind asking her the percentage of those different languages in English? And so my friend raised her hand and said, could you tell us the percentage of words that come from those languages in English? And Marcia said, what an excellent question. I said, but it's my question. And what I remember her saying, and it's something that's just always stayed with me, is the density will change as students move through their schooling. So when they're in kindergarten, first and second grade, the density of Anglo-Saxon words, Old English words, is really great, isn't it? And then as they move up, that density changes, and what do they see more of? Those Latin words, and then they also see some of those Greek words. And that's just always stayed with me because, as Marcia said this morning, the ones that give students the most trouble are those Anglo-Saxon Old English words, and that's where they start reading. So if we can help them with those words, we're really setting them up for success with the Latin and Greek because they're going to be a little bit more reliable for spelling than the Anglo-Saxon and Greek. So we're going to look at some of the words that come from these different layers of language. You did an excellent job this morning being able to identify the Anglo-Saxon, the Latin, and the Greek words by looking at morphemes. We're going to do it now by looking at spelling patterns, so you can look at words from all different angles. So here are some common spelling patterns that we find in Anglo-Saxon Old English words. So what is the common spelling pattern here? GH. So words with GH tend to be words that are part of that Anglo-Saxon Old English layer. And my understanding is that at one time, the language was very phonetic. So every single letter was pronounced. So think about pronouncing all these words with a hard G and an H. That's really hard. So what happened was the printing press finalized the spelling of a lot of words, but the pronunciations were a little difficult. They were awkward. They kept evolving, but what happened to the spellings? They stayed the way they were. So that's why we have a lot of these words where the spelling and the pronunciation don't match. So words with GH are going to be words that come from that first layer. How about these words? What's the same? Right, they all begin with that spelling pattern of WR. Can you tell me something about the meanings of these words? What's similar about them? Right, they all have the meaning to twist. So you can twist your wrist, you can wring out a towel, and a wrench is something you use with a twisting motion. So that can be helpful for students when they're trying to spell a word that begins with R. Should I put a W there? Does it have anything to do with twist? That could be helpful. How about ridge, edge, badge? Right, that pattern of D, G, E. We don't hear the D, but there it is. This is also true of the TCH. When we use D, G, E, or TCH, we're using them in short words. And Anglo-Saxon Old English words tend to be short, and it usually is going to be after a short vowel. So those are some patterns for Anglo-Saxon Old English words. Now let's look at some Latin words. What's similar about all of these words? Right, they have that letter pattern CT, and as you learned this morning, in Latin, when we want to talk about a person, the actor or the director or the instructor, what will we add? OR. If we're talking about people and they happen to be Anglo-Saxon, like the farm, what are we using? ER. How about these words? We have nation, partial, pretentious. Right, TI, and tell me about the pronunciation. Shh. And we know there are how many different spellings of the sh sound? 14, and this is one. And how about illegal, attract, appoint? What do you see? Right, those double consonants near the beginning, and why does that happen? What are those called? Chameleon. And then if you're a linguist, you would say assimilated, right, Marcia? Assimilated prefixes. And we know that it's that combination of changing the last letter of the prefix to match the first letter of the root, and it just makes it easier to pronounce, it makes it sound better, those chameleon prefixes. Greek words, and these should all look Greek to you. Graph, phrase, telephone. Right, that f sound, PH is spelling the f sound. How about chorus, chord, chemistry? CH, and what pronunciation? K. And what we know is CH doesn't occur in Latin words, but we will find CH in that layer that we call the Anglo-Saxon Old English. Tell me about the pronunciation of CH in that layer. Ch, ch. So when CH says K, it's going to be Latin. And how about gem, time, and rhythm? That medial Y, and that Y is really going to act like a medial I. So now you have your clues, right? And it's time for your final. So do you need a minute to study, or do you feel pretty good? Okay, so for the final, I'm going to put a word on the screen. If it is an Anglo-Saxon Old English word, I want you to do this. I want you to sigh, go, do that for me. Now, why is sigh an Anglo-Saxon Old English word? GH. Now, why are you going to sigh? Because these are words you see a lot of. You see them every day. It's like when you're in a room full of people, you don't know anybody, and then all of a sudden you see someone you know. What do? These are like your friends. You know, these are words that have been with you since you started reading. If it is a Latin word, I want you to do this. I want you to applaud. Now, how do you know that applaud is a Latin word? Right, so the prefix is really what? Add. So a laud means to praise, and then if we're clapping, our praise is going to or toward someone or something. And then if they're Greek, I'm going to say the words, and I want you to echo them after me. So I would say the word, and you'd echo it. Tell me why echo, that word, is Greek. CH making the k sound. Now, the reason you're going to echo the Greek words is that we've echoed a lot of things that the ancient Greeks gave us, ideas about philosophy and theater and the Olympics, a lot of ideas. So you're going to echo Greek words. So here you are. Here's your final. First word, technical. Okay, I heard some clapping and I heard some echoing. Let's see if we can think about it. Technical. Right, why is it Greek? The CH, right. How about ignition? Right, how do you know it's Latin? Yeah, that TI, sh, and then that suffix. How about hydrogen? How did you know it was Greek? How about knowledge? How did you know? That DGE at the end. Were you a little nervous at the beginning? What else do you see in that word? That K, that silent K at the beginning. That is an Anglo-Saxon word. How about spectrum? How about illustrate? How about wreath? And what does it have to do with twisting? Right, you're twisting vines and branches around. And this word, photography. Photography, how do you know it's Greek? The PH, and you might know those word parts, photo and graph. How about enough? And probably we've had enough of this. You did very well. Oh, no, you have one more. Congratulations. Yeah, give yourself a round of applause. You did a great job. So when we have students look at words, for whatever reason, the more they look at them, the more they can see those patterns. When they see those patterns, they can build them in memory that will help spell words accurately. So what do we do for the students that get a lot of 4s? As I mentioned earlier, if they are adding the E all the time, if they're changing the Y to I but also keeping the Y, you just have them verbalize the pattern or the rule, just so they can keep saying it to themselves, so as they're spelling, they can begin to have that dialogue in their head. And here are some words that are, truly sight words. So if they're words that you just have to memorize, that tells us that we need to give students a way to memorize those words that you just can't sound out. You have to hold them in memory. And why are words irregular? Well, it's because their orthographic representations don't match the way we pronounce them. And what we can do for these words that are really irregular is to have them do a trace and copy, where they see the word, they say the word, and they trace over it 3 times, and they name the letters as they write. Enough, E-N-O-U-G-H, enough, E-N-O-U-G-H, 3 times. Then they write it 3 times, naming the word and naming the letters. They then fold the paper so they can't see the model. They close their eyes and they try to spell it in their mind's eye 3 times, and then without the model, they write it 3 times, naming the word and naming the letters. Would you want to have to do that for every single word you have to learn? No. But for those words that are really irregular, or for the words that students keep misspelling, this works like magic, because they're really putting all of the information together, naming the letters over and over again. Oh, I had all these cute things I forgot, but you get the idea of how you do it. Another thing we can do with irregular words is to give them a spelling pronunciation. When you write this word on the board, what do you say to yourself? Wednesday, and you know that's not how it's pronounced, but why do you pronounce it that way? To help you spell it correctly. How about those next 3? What might you do? Cano, cani, canuck. And then I have a very special story about this next one. When my sister and I were young, we found a dog, and the dog had a name tag, and we looked at the name tag and we said, oh, the dog's name is Colano. Well, we took Colano home with us. We had never had a dog, always wanted a dog. We loved Colano. We bathed them, we brushed them, and one night the phone rang, and my father answered the phone, and he'd been out of town, so he didn't know the particulars about the dog. He just knew we had the dog. He came into our room and he said, girls, there's someone on the phone. They've lost their dog. The dog's name is Colonel. Is that your dog? We looked at each other and said, no, Dad. Our dog's name is Colano. So he walked over, picked the phone up and said, yes, sir, we have your dog. So to this day, when I have to spell that word, I think of that cute little dog, Colano. And the history is interesting because it does come from the Latin, and it represents the person who is in charge of a column of men. Then the word went into the French language, and for some reason, the French changed the medial L to an R, and they called that person a colonel, right? And then when they wanted to bring the word into English, they wanted to be true to the Latin roots, so they changed the spelling back from R to L, but unfortunately, the French pronunciation stayed with the word. So that's why that word is so really impossible to spell. And then I want to spend just the last few minutes thinking about analyzing words. So when students have a list of words that they have to learn, how can we help them learn them in a way that helps them spell them not just for the Friday test, but helps them spell them for a lifetime? We want to analyze because it will heighten students' awareness of sounds and words. It will force them to look at the orthographic and morphological patterns of the language, and that helps build their memory of patterns and build patterns in memory. And analyzing really makes students think. You know, I know when I was in school, we had to write our words 10 times on Monday, and I did that on the bus. And what I did was A, you know. So I didn't ever really get the sense of spelling the whole word, but we really, and I never thought about how they were spelled. I was just finishing the task. But we want to make students think about how words are spelled, and it's fun. It's real funner. It's funner than just memorizing. So when we think about phonemes, we're thinking about the speech sounds. A grapheme is a letter or a group of letters that represent a specific sound. So we'll talk about regular words, and they're spelled just the way they sound. They're following the most frequent patterns and rules, patterns, but a rule word is going to be a word where we have to double drop or change a letter, and then irregular words are spelled in an unexpected way. We want to have students in the beginning read the word, segment the word, match each phoneme to each grapheme, and then decide if it is regular, rule, or irregular. So I'm going to take you through the first one. So if this was our very first time doing it, or if you were a class of first or second graders, we might do this together. The word is clam. Say it. Clam. Now let's unblend it. K, l, a, m. So there are sounds. Now tell me what's spelling the k sound as you look at the word. See, is that the best way to spell the k sound in this word? Yes. Why wouldn't you use K? Right, because it's coming before a consonant and it's not before E-I or Y. So that's a good way to spell it. The next sound is L. How's it being spelled? Does that make sense? Yes. Is there another way to spell it? Nope. How about A? Does that make sense? Yeah, that's a good way to spell it. And then M. So clam is spelled just the way we expect to spell it. It is regular, right? Now, do you have to go home and memorize that word? No, you can spell it by sounding it out. You can spell it by sounding it out in practice, on the test on Friday, on Monday morning. If you forget what it looks like, what can you do? Sound it out. 6 weeks from now, if you forget what it looks like, you can sound it out. And if you do that enough, you're going to build that word in memory. How about lobster? L, A, B, S, T, R. What's spelling the L sound? Is that reasonable? What's spelling the A sound? Is that reasonable? What's spelling the B sound? The sound? T, And we know that the sound can be spelled with ER, AR, OR, but in a word like this, ER is best. And one of the ways that we know this is an Anglo-Saxon word is we know that the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes were hunters, farmers, and fishermen. So often the words related to those three areas are Anglo-Saxon. So do we have to memorize that word? We can sound it out. And the more we practice it, we build it in memory, so it's there. We won't have to sound it out eventually, but we can. How about ocean? Oh, so what don't you like about it? Or I should say, what do you like about it? Really, the O's okay, and the N at the end, everything in the middle. So what is the best way for you to learn this? We're going to do that trace and copy. Because is this a word students need to know? Yeah, they're going to see this word not only in first and second grade, they're going to see it when they talk about the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. It's a word that they need to know, so we'll spend some time tracing and copying. How about sunning? It's a rule word, right. So if we were to sound it out, it's spelled just the way it sounds, but we do have to remember to double that final consonant. How about swimmer? Same thing. It's a rule word. So that just means when we're spelling, we have to remember to do something, double, drop, or change, but it's going to be spelled almost the way it sounds if we remember to do that double, drop, or change. How about shrimp? Now, I just want you to notice what you're doing. In the beginning, I led you through it, right? And I had you match it up. Now, what are you doing by yourselves? You're sounding them out and you're matching them up. And that's what students will begin to do. They'll think about the sounds. They'll think about how those sounds are represented. So what do you say about shrimp? Regular. How about crab? How about starfish? Yeah, and the best way to spell the R sound is A-R, so that's good. How about sailboat? The problem with that is, yeah, A-I, and not that we know that it can spell the A sound, but so could A consonant E, right? So when there's a question, we could put that word in a mnemonic, that spelling in a mnemonic sentence, what I'll show you in a minute. Those might be words that I'm going to call irregular only because I think I need a little more attention on those. So I know that it's AI versus A consonant E, and it's OA instead of O consonant E. And so I'll call them irregular, and then we'll do some work with mnemonics, and we'll look at that in a minute. How about relaxation? You know, I could teach them that end, right? Shun. If I taught them that, is that going to be helpful? Oh my goodness, I remember when I discovered that. It just opened a world of words for me. So when we look at this list, most of them are regular. So the students really should be able to sound them out and spell them. When they're spelling the rule words, they need to remember to double the N or the M. And then those irregular words need special attention. They need to really stop and think about those words. Ocean is one that we would take through that trace and copy, saying it, writing it over and over again, because that's one that they really need to have in memory. So they would go through that. Or we could have, for the AI and OA, put together a mnemonic sentence where all the words with the A sound are spelled the same way. So they can remember, if you wait, the rain will fall on the train as it crosses the plain. If they remember one of those words, they'll remember that they're all AI. The same is true with OA. The goat will float on the boat and eat some soap. So if they remember one of those words and they remember the sentence, they'll remember how to spell them. So irregular just means we need to give students a little help on learning those words. So I'd like you to just spend about 5 minutes looking at the list that you find at the end of your handout. Choose a list and see how you do in terms of deciding whether or not, when you analyze them, they're regular, rule, or irregular. So, I mean, that might be a first grade list. This might be 5th grade, maybe 6th grade. So choose a list. Okay, egg would be irregular because doubling the G just doesn't happen. Is that going to be a hard one for them to learn? No. How about lamb? What don't you like there? Irregular. But what could you have them do? Give it a spelling pronunciation. Lamb. Now, you don't say that, but it will help you remember to spell it. Cow, the ow sound in medial or initial position will be OU, but English words don't usually end in U, so W takes its place. And the minute you say English words don't end in U, what happens? What about YOU? And you say, good for you. Okay. And anyone try, oh, horse? What about horse? At the end, after a consonant, that final is SE. And I will make a list of patterns available. I'll send them to Dr. Hirschman, and that will help you know what patterns go with what sounds or how you spell certain sounds. So look for that on the website where you got your handout, and that will be helpful there. Did anyone try this list? Any questions with those? Actually, sometimes the Latin and the Greek words are easier, right? Anyone try this list? And you can see how knowing morphemes is going to help as they're working with those longer words that might be content words. So what we did today was to really make spelling a little more scientific in terms of thinking about how sounds are spelled, thinking about where students might have difficulty knowing what they know and what they need to know. And so I'll just leave you with this thought: make your spelling scientific, and it will be terrific. Thank you very much.